There are quite a few different new Nintendo Switch 2 news stories to cover today, starting with one of the major organizational changes for Nintendo being officially announced because Doug Bowser has announced his intention to retire the end of this year as the Nintendo of America president, and we have a new president that will succeed him that has been named, in addition to a different CEO for NOA, which is also a very tenured name that you may or may not be familiar with, so we'll cover all of that. Then we have kind of a hot button issue that will not go away. The game key card controversy is back in the news, and this time with yet another source. And now we have two different development sources kind of stating one of the reasons why some of these companies are opting to go the game key card route. And it has me thinking Nintendo may not ever take these things away or actually reverse course away from them in the Switch 2 generation or beyond. And there is one fix on the table that we will of course highlight, but whether or not Nintendo does that, we will have to wait and see. So we'll get on the same page with that. Then we do have some very exciting footage of Resident Evil Requiem running and looking incredible in handheld mode on Nintendo Switch 2. And this is pretty reassuring about what some major third-party ports can look like on the console hardware. I then want to quickly go over the major updates that recently hit Mario Kart World, because Nintendo has actually done some listening with this one and seemed to have streamlined a number of different complaints that fans were definitely vocal about online. And some of these changes are meaningfully good and will actually get me to go back into the game and make some more progress towards the completion of my save file. And then finally, Yooka Replayly has some new info related to it, tons of new gameplay. It's literally out October 9th, so right around the corner, but not the best news for the maximum frame rate of the Switch 2 version, but there is some hope and silver lining for the future of this game. So we'll get on the same page with all of this info. Before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification to join Sunbro Nation if you're new here. And we're going to first kick this off right over at VGC, where you can see their article written up with the presidential level changes that are going on at Nintendo of America. Doug Bowser is stepping down as Nintendo of America president and COO. He will be replaced by a 19-year Nintendo veteran, Devon Pritchard. We have here Bowser will retire from his roles on December 31st, 2025, at which point he will be replaced by Devon Pritchard. Pritchard, who is currently Nintendo of America's Executive Vice President of Revenue, Marketing, and Consumer Experience, joined Nintendo 19 years ago and is described by the company as a long-standing member of the NOA leadership team. He will also join the NOA Board of Directors and become an NCL Executive Officer. Along with Pritchard's promotion, Satoru Shibata, the former Nintendo of Europe President and current Managing Executive Officer, Corporate Director, and member of the board at NCL, Nintendo's Japan arm, will join Nintendo of America as its CEO while continuing his roles at NCL. Bowser became Nintendo of America president in April 2019 after Reggie Fils-Aimé stepped down from the role, and the company has joked numerous times about him having the same name as Mario's arch nemesis. One of my earliest video game experiences was playing the arcade version of Donkey Kong, Bowser said in a statement. Since that time, all things Nintendo have continued to be a passion for both me and my family. Leading Nintendo of America has been the great honor of a lifetime, and I am proud of what our team has accomplished in both business results and experiences we've created for consumers. Now it's time for the next generation of leadership, and Devon's track record speaks for itself. She is an exceptional leader, and her promotion is a testament to her strong performance and strategic contributions to the company's growth. I have full confidence that she will guide the company to even greater heights. So there you have it. Bowser has announced that he is leaving Nintendo. Never thought the day would come where Mario has officially won out. I mean, Bowser's actually leaving the company. So if you can believe that, Mario's still around in Nintendo. Bowser will not be as of the end of this year. And I do think it's just funny, one of those ironic things that how in the world does it happen that somebody with the legit legal last name Bowser ends up becoming the Nintendo of America president? That's a fact and something that we have in the record books. But this is going to be a big leadership change because we don't get these Nintendo of America president changes all that often. And I gotta say, for me personally, no complaints with Bowser. I actually think he did a fine job leading Nintendo of America over these past years. I am still nostalgic for the Reggie Fils-Aimé early era of Nintendo and kind of his personality and more maybe even fight for change within the company type of reputation he had, and rightfully so. I mean, we've learned via interviews that the entire reason that Wii Sports ended up being a pack-in game for the Nintendo Wii was because he fought for that and wouldn't just allow Nintendo to sell it as a separate game. Looking at Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour, that should have been a pack-in game. It didn't happen this generation, so you kind of look back on certain stories like that and remember certain presidents more fondly than others. But Bowser nonetheless had a good run at Nintendo of America. Wasn't quite as vocal or front and center when it comes to the media side of things, so I don't feel like I saw him other than, you know, big interviews around the launch of the Switch 2, of course, Game Awards, acceptance speeches and stuff like that. But Devon Pritchard being poised and ready, 19 years plus experience with Nintendo, I'm sure we're not going to notice a huge difference in any of the day-to-day Nintendo of America operations. For the most part, it will probably still be a pretty seamless transition, but you never know. We'll have to wait and see if somebody comes along and really lights a fire under fans and maybe creates more of a lasting impression than Reggie Fils-Aimé or even Doug Bowser. So moving on from there, we do have some really interesting comments around the game keycard situation, because you're probably well familiar at this point. It's not a popular option for physical games online amongst gamers, but we are trying to identify the real reason behind why so many companies are opting to use game keycards from a third-party perspective. One potential reason is, of course, just the size and scope of some of the games. Some of these bigger third-party games are coming in 90 gigabytes plus, like Final Fantasy VII Remake Integrate that we're going to talk about in a moment. And we know currently Nintendo is just manufacturing one 64 gigabyte Nintendo Switch physical cartridge, or Switch 2 rather, which would lead you to believe, yeah, certain games are going to be automatically past that, which means they're probably going to go game keycard route. Because if you're not familiar at somehow at this point in time with what a keycard is, no data is on the cartridge itself. It's just kind of a key to download the game from the server. Granted, you can resell your copy. It's something that can go from a different Switch system to another one without it caring about anything other than it needs that first time connection to the internet to download the file. Once you have the file on the console, it does not matter if you are connected to the internet or not, but you do have to have the key card actually physically inserted into your console, of course, to actually play that product. Now, what is interesting is we've seen a number of other third-party devs with smaller games in scope also opt to use the game keycard, and that's where the cost factor has kind of creeped into the conversation. And I definitely still think that that is a thing, because we see some games like Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection that is indeed $10 more expensive on the Nintendo Switch 2 version of that game than any of the other platforms, and it is a complete on-cartridge experience for the Switch 2. So clearly there is some additional cost, to the point where publishers are just comfortable with charging the extra to the end consumer at the end of the day in certain cases. Then you had a really interesting recent interview pop up from Star Wars Outlaws developers, and they actually cited that the read speed of the Nintendo Switch 2 cartridge was actually a bottleneck for them when it comes to larger open world game environments, and that they didn't even recall cost being a factor in the decision on why they went with a game key card. And of course, with the kind of reputation Ubisoft has online, I think some people just discounted those comments and thought they probably wanted the money. It was not going to be anything that this would hamper game developers' abilities to stream in all the game data that they need fast enough. And, you know, there is actually a noticeable, measurable difference you can see with boot up times in certain games like Mario Kart World on a cartridge versus if it's on your internal storage. So there is actually some real world data to back up this idea. But now we have this very interesting article making the rounds out of Tokyo Game Show, where you can see Final Fantasy director says game keycards aren't about cost, but about speed. Final Fantasy VII Remake director Naoki Hamaguchi has spoken openly about the controversial Nintendo Switch 2 game keycards. While he admits that there are positives and negatives regarding the game keycards, he says that generally they aren't about reducing cost, but instead used to quickly load data assets in games which cartridges cannot do. Here's what he said. I've heard the reaction to various Nintendo gamers towards the game keycard, he says via an interpreter. I understand where they are coming from, definitely. I can see the things that they are maybe annoyed with, maybe with why they don't like it, and I get that, I really do. But certainly amongst developers, the discussion about game keycard format is perhaps a bit different than what fans may expect. It's always, I think, looked at in terms of memory restrictions, and that's an issue. That's not something we can ignore. The fact that the standard cartridge has smaller memory and we have to work around that. But I think perhaps the biggest issue for developers, certainly for people like us who make high-end HD games, is the loading speed. Because you compare that to the solid state drive and the speed you can get from loading from that, and it's going to be inferior to that. It just has to be. That's the way media works physically. So that's the bigger issue, really, in terms of making games, making high-end games for Switch 2, and what it allows, obviously, by doing a semi-downloaded version of the game. You can then use the SSD to rely on that for a smoother loading. So perhaps the bigger issue in terms of development. This is just my personal thoughts about this, but I'd kind of like, if possible, maybe Nintendo fans to understand game key cards and maybe come to accept them as part of the culture of gaming on Switch, because it allows more opportunities. It's an option. It's not that everyone has to use it, but it's another option to deliver games to fans. And I think we could lose out on opportunities. There may be people, if we didn't have that option, who wouldn't play the game. So from a developer's perspective, it allows us to bring more high-end experiences to Switch players, and I think that's a good thing. So this is an interesting statement, because now it being a secondary source, not just the one developer we're hearing from Star Wars Outlaws mention this, but also the Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade team citing the same thing. And both of those are larger in scope games in terms of their open areas, more current gen modern visuals and all of that. I think there's something to this here, and I do think that it's an unfortunate situation now, because if you're not for the key card, and I myself am not a fan of it so much, well, you really are in a situation where now Nintendo has become the barrier with the technology that they allow on the Switch 2 for third-party devs, because now you do have to have this conversation about load times being crucial to the game key card. And the problem with why you would still go for a game key card, if that is your issue, is that there's no way to install directly from a Nintendo cartridge the game files to the internal system storage. And Nintendo could implement something like that in theory through a firmware upgrade, but whether or not they will, that's really a stretch and a coin toss of an idea. I don't know that they will actually do it, and that's really probably the only solution, to basically have some of these third-party devs opt to use traditional physical cartridges for some of their larger third-party, more open world projects. If you just need faster load times and they're not there as part of a traditional Nintendo Switch 2 cartridge, you're going to go the keycard route, because you cannot install those files if you sell it on a regular cartridge. That's one of the advantages to it not taking up all your internal storage of picking it up physically on a game card. But if it's a drawback in terms of the load speeds and you need those load speeds, well, obviously you see the problem there. So I personally think this is more of a nail in the coffin on the conversation around key cards maybe going away. I mean, you could argue that Nintendo should still definitely do multiple sizes of Switch 2 cartridges to reduce cost, and some of the smaller in scope games can go to an on-cartridge experience. That's obviously ideal and what they should do. But at the same time, now we have this thing that unless if Nintendo gives you a way to install your game data off their traditional cartridge, you're now sacrificing potential game performance and maybe making a port to the Switch 2 not playable, which is obviously going to be something where, hey, it's better to have a key card than to have nothing at all, I suppose. So moving on next from there, we have a 3-minute look at Resident Evil Requiem running on the handheld version of Switch 2. And shout out to the creator. I saw post this over on X. I will have their actual post linked in the description down below, so you can go check out the footage firsthand. Now, a lot of this footage is actually, of the 3 minutes, is a pre-rendered cutscene. Now, cutscene looks incredible. It's in-engine footage and all that stuff, but we get to the actual gameplay a little bit later on. And outside of being really picky with things like the hair, and maybe you could say compared to other versions, there are certain details that maybe don't look quite as impressive in this version. This to me looks like an excellent modern day AAA game running on a handheld piece of hardware that is $450 USD. And I know that's not a popular price point, but you look around, the Xbox's pricing seems to be $599 and $999 for their newest handheld. Steam Deck, I don't think is going to be running this quite looking like this, if at all. Yeah, this is a really good looking upcoming third-party port to the platform. And it does have some questions being raised around RE Engine and how well that runs third-party ports on Switch 2 compared to some other games that we're seeing that are less impressive than this, and they're having seemingly more performance hiccups than this. I think there's really something to the RE Engine and just how good it is. I believe that that's what the Street Fighter 6 port runs on as well. I do think that this is one that is going to be very exciting to watch as it gets closer. And we even had some reassuring comments from the series director of Requiem saying it wasn't a challenge bringing the game to Switch 2. The game was developed in a very scalable way with the RE engine. Capcom was surprised in a good way on how easy it was to port the existing version of Requiem to Switch 2. And apparently this was something that was originally tested out with Biohazard, and there's a big reason that we're getting all the games on the same date. It's because they're all ready to go in that time frame, and they want everybody to be able to play it seamlessly around that time. But yeah, some cool comments. It's nice to hear things going smoothly for Switch 2 ports and not some of these games that we've heard about recently that either need additional development time, they're getting delays, or we just don't know when they're coming out. Like, go watch my Elden Ring video from yesterday. That's a big one for me, hoping it's still making 2025. We don't know. But moving on next from there, we do have Mario Kart World and a new version that patched a lot of stuff. So we're just going to read some of the highlights here. You can definitely hop in and see the changes immediately for yourself. It's now live and available, but you do have some of the general highlights. You can now join friends playing Knockout Tour by selecting friends from online play, which is definitely a no-brainer thing and something that I'm glad they added in. Up to 2 players can now play free roam while waiting if the game was full while trying to join friends playing Race, Knockout Tour, or Battle in online play. The free roam map now displays location of P-switches you've run over and Peach medallions you've obtained. You can now select a P-switch from the map to move to a location near the P-switch. In free roam, you can now transform into the character pulled into the UFO. If dash food in settings/controller is set to doesn't transform, then you will not transform. It's easier to encounter UFOs in free roam, and conditions for appearances of some Peach medallions in free roam have been adjusted. There is a whole host of different updates, but I will say just having that big quality of life improvement with knowing which P-switches you've completed, which ones you haven't, and being able to teleport nearby to them, that makes for so much of an easier experience to go and track down all those things. It is something that I intended to eventually find them all. This gives me kind of a reason to go back and start to see which ones I still need to knock out and not have to worry about just not having a really easy way to track them on a map, on a visual map, and then, you know, actually drive to them physically, whereas you can now teleport seamlessly nearby to these P-switches. That's huge, not that hard of an implementation, and something that really should have been there at launch, but I'm glad they've added it now. Also, there's an adjustment and a higher % chance in frequency of seeing traditional lap courses when you are playing in online mode, which was a big controversy for, of course, people who play competitively online. You want more of those traditional lap courses, and up to this point you were getting a lot of those highway courses still. Even though Nintendo said they adjusted that before, it does seem like this is a much higher percentage now, and you are still going to get some highway courses, but it seems to be maybe more in the realm of it's more likely to get a lap course than it is a highway course now at this point in time, which is just some nice adjustments to see, and Nintendo actually listening to some feedback, which they historically are not always too well known for doing. So, and lastly, to close this out here, you have the following headline, which is just no good way around this. Yooka-Laylee runs at 30 FPS on Nintendo Switch 2. Those who were hoping for 60 FPS on the undemanding Yooka-Laylee on Nintendo Switch 2 will be disappointed to know that the 3D platformer will only run at 30 FPS on Switch 2. Developers Playtonic say a performance mode for Yooka-Laylee on Nintendo Switch 2 could eventually come a later date. There's a demo of the game for the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and S, which runs at 60 FPS and features 4K visuals. The demo has not been announced for the Nintendo Switch 2 version. So unfortunate right now with where we stand. I mean, I'm hoping that we do see a performance mode implemented at or a little bit after launch. It could be further down the line than that. This game can run at 60 FPS on the Series S. I think it absolutely can. On the Switch 2, I think this is an optimization issue and not something where it's actually really testing the limits of what Switch 2 hardware can do. But it is one of those unfortunate things, at least at launch, that is going to be a downgrade in the experience on the Switch 2 compared to the other console hardware. And this is one that I'm excited to pick up and check out. And it's definitely something I still want to get on my Switch 2 because I could see myself, you know, casually picking this up and playing through little sections of it in handheld mode when I'm on the go and stuff. So it's still going to be my console of choice to pick it up for, but obviously you'd want to see some kind of performance mode, hopefully implemented sooner rather than later. But let me know your take on all the different stories we talked about today. New Nintendo president being announced for Nintendo of America. What do you think about the game keycard comments and situation and potential load times being the issue behind game keycards, and that's why they're utilized in some cases by third-party devs? What do you think of the Resident Evil Requiem footage we've seen so far, the new patch for Mario Kart World, and are you interested in Yooka-Replay on the Switch 2 or any other hardware? So make sure you share all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below before you leave, regardless if we agree or disagree. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn your notification bell. And with that, I've been Sunbro, you've been Nation. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.